So I don't know if we did this, but just a way once to start with, it says one shouldn't daven in front of a mirror. It's not permitted for the Shemona Israel. That comes from the Mishnah Brura
We covered
because
that.
of this. How did we? Because it gives it's okay. So in terms of davening, the ideal time to daven is at nates, the sunrise. Waking up early is the ideal time. It's not an obligation, and it says if it's going to disturb your day, and you can daven later. I mean, if you start work at 9 o'clock and you don't, and then there's a 7 o'clock minyan, you don't have to go to a nate's minyan, but obviously say that Shema time. Then it says here the ideal time to daven is at a time when a regular minyan is taking place, so that the person's prayer will join those of a communal davening, even if he is not physically with them, i.e., davening alone. Mincha must be davened before sunset, that's Shkia. While Maariv should ideally be davened before Chatzot, midnight, and you have to say the Shema when 3 stars come out. Then you've fulfilled the obligation. Otherwise, you have to repeat it. And it says some shuls actually daven Maariv early if they're a minyan, they can do that. But if you daven on your own, you should daven Maariv only when 3 stars come out. If one more point here, a person that doesn't have a regular minyan to daven with should daven mincha before doing significant activities. It doesn't say what it is. If one needs to do a major activity, such as a haircut or a major meal, one should daven first, or appoint a shomer to remind him to daven. Okay.
Okay. Generally, what should happen, by the way, is many shuls that end early, you still, when the appointed time comes, have to repeat the Shema on your own, even though you get the mitzvah of being part of the minyan.
I know. I think it's all of them virtually, and I always forget to do it, and it's a big problem.
You repeat the Shema, yes. Yeah,
that's
right.
I forget, especially for my read. We do all the back-to-backs in South Africa. I think specifically in summer. I'm not sure about winter, but summer there's a problem.
Yeah, winter there's no problem. Summer I've got an alarm because I don't remember without it.
I need to do that as well. I just don't do it, and it's a massive problem. All right, sorry. Thanks, guys. Thanks for reminding me as well.
All right, so we're on a different discussion now. The Gemara discusses what does or does not constitute a change with regard to a stolen palm tree. When we talk about a change, we're saying, well, what is the definition of a change? And we're on the 96 stuff. Rav Papa said, but in the case of this person who stole a palm tree from his fellow and cut it down, even though he felled it from the land in which it was growing onto his own land, he does not acquire it. What's the reason that he does not acquire it through changing the stolen tree from one that is growing to one that is cut down? Because originally it's called a palm tree, and guess what? When you cut it down, it's still called a palm tree. So what's this whole case about? Is that the palm tree was planted at the edge of the owner's property, which was adjacent to the robber's property. Now, this is not a robber whose career is in robbery. He basically wanted the tree for himself, whether it had fruit or wood or whatever the case may be. So the robber felled the tree so that it would actually fall into his own property. In other words, he cut it at a point where gravity would take effect and just fall over, and it would look like an accident, right? So the robber, this process of taking the felled tree into his own property, and it was labeled, he thought the robber, it was labeled as a change, meaning from a growing tree to a dead one. Because if it's no longer getting sustenance from the ground, once it's felled, Kevin would love the word felled. Felled as in trimmed, and felled as in fell down to the ground. I thought Kevin would enjoy that. Is that they occurred simultaneously, right? So the change, that was the definition here. If the cutting down would constitute a legal change in the stolen palm tree, it would cause the tree itself to be acquired by the robber, who would then be obligated to return only its monetary value to the owner. So what it seems like is a case of since the person that robbed the next door neighbor of the tree isn't actually making any money, because when he gets the tree, he has to pay the equivalent to his neighbor. It could be, it's very interesting. I was in a case where there were two people that I know in an area not far from me, two Jewish guys that actually spent I think they spent like 2 days and 2 nights in prison over a weekend, because the next door neighbor set them up, and the one suffers from extreme hay fever, and the tree was causing him to be sick. So he cut the tree down, and they had the two brothers arrested. And they would, this woman that was married to a non-Jewish guy provoked them, pushed the one, and the one in defense of his brother pushed back. And anyway, the police were there, but they didn't do anything when the next door neighbor assaulted them. So it was obviously all set up. Anyway, they both said that they asked the one why he became a little frummer. He said, jail over a weekend will do that to you. He said, you feel very vulnerable. Very. So it occurred in this case, and I was just thinking about it when I was in Tzfat. I heard about this case. He told me, is that sometimes, so even if you owe back the tree, sometimes that tree has got certain toxins or pollens, or it's just creating a lot of devastation or mess on your property. So even if you paid the owner for it, your goal is to get rid of the tree. So we're thinking here that who would actually get the tree? The neighbor, so he could get rid of it. In this case, the plan didn't work, and the original owner could get the tree back, and the neighbor wouldn't compensate, which means, can you grow it again? I'm not sure. But the point of it is the cutting down of the tree doesn't constitute a change. Just because it was felled and it went from growing to now not getting its nutrients from the soil. Because that sort of change would, you would think, would affect the acquisition of the tree for the robber, and the robber would have to give the financial equivalent. But according to Rashi, you must return the felled tree and not merely its monetary value, right? So if you have a look, because then it was called a palm tree, and guess what? Now it's called a palm tree, meaning there's no change of name to affect acquisition. A change of name does play a factor. So we learned that there are three changes that play a factor. The one, well, the first one is despair, often. Is that when the original owner despair, the new person gets acquisition, because if you despair of it, you've let go of ownership, you've kind of given up. The second aspect is physical change. When it morphs in physical properties, according to how you stole it originally, then you're not returning the article that you stole. It's almost like it's extant or non-existent. So you give the financial equivalent. If there's a domain change, and we don't mean the domain change is an argument. Is it the domain change of the robber that affects acquisition? So I've covered a case where the robber sells it to a buyer, and therefore there were two changes of property or domain, one from the original owner to the robber, and then from the robber to the buyer. So in that case, they definitely hold that the change of domain affects, and the other one is a change of a name. Meaning if it went from a board to now being called furniture, that also constitutes a change. So Rav Papa continues, guys, in the 96 stuff, A3, if one stole a palm tree and made it into logs, he does not acquire it. For even now, at any rate, they are still called palm tree logs. Their name then remains essentially the same. If, however, he stole logs and made them into beams, he does acquire them. Okay? Why? Because they are now merely called beams. There's no connection to the palm trees itself, like logs. So obviously they've effected acquisition because they look more refined. So we don't know if it's just because it's a name change or they've taken a physical effect that makes them look indiscernible from the original palm tree. Okay? So if he stole large beams and made them into small beams, he does not acquire them since their name remains essentially the same. If, however, he made the beams into boards, he does acquire them, okay? Because they were previously called beams and now they're called boards, meaning they don't resemble physically a way to discern them from their previous state. And you must know that it works like that in brochas as well. An apple on the tree, Kevin, is what bracha?
Eights.
And when you put it in a blender and you make it stewed for dessert, what's it called now?
I think it's shekel because the form's changed.
Yes, when you cannot recognize it from the original form, the form has changed. So it affects even the sort of bracha that you do and the order in which you consume that article. Because if it was eights, it would take precedence over shekel. There are opinions if you prefer the shekel. Does preference take precedence over eights? And I mean, they're very complicated halachas. But all things being the same, eights is more important. So we see their physical changing does affect, and here we were dealing with name changes. So the Gemara proceeds to discuss what constitutes a change with respect to the fronds of a palm tree. Okay, now I must be honest with you, when I learned this Gemara on Shabbos, I actually had no idea what this term fronds is. It rhymes with ponds. And a frond is the leaf or leaf-like part of the palm, fern or similar plant. So that's something I never knew, guys. I don't know if you did. Guys?
No, I've never heard that word in my life.
Yeah. So the fronds of a palm tree are the leaf or leaf-like part of the palm or fern. So Rava said, in the case of this person who stole a lulav and made it into loose leaves, he acquires them. For origin, so in other words, he tore the leaves of the lulav branch. Okay, so for originally, he called it a lulav, and now they are called leaves. If he stole lulav leaves and made them into a broom, he acquires them. Now, what do you mean if you stole lulav leaves and make them into a broom? Generally, the only thing that you can make into a broom is wood. Okay, and what we are saying is here, I don't know if you've ever seen how they do the lulav in Etrog. They weave together the leaves to make it look like a basket where the hadassim and the aruvin fit into either side. I don't know if you understand what I'm saying, that basket.
Exactly.
So what happens is if you have a long basket all the way down, it like resembles a broom. Okay.
Mm.
And the reason why I have to get you that definition is because otherwise the last part doesn't make sense. If they stole a broom and made it into a rope, he does not acquire them. What's the reason? Because again, he can unravel the rope and it will once again become a broom. So when I'm reading this, I'm thinking to myself, what are you talking about? Basically, a broom's a broom, a rope is a piece of string. What does a hard piece of wood have to do with a piece of string? So we're not talking about that. We're talking about the leaf, that you can either intertwine it to where it becomes almost like a beam, like that basket looks like a beam if you weave it tight, or if you had one piece and you wrap it over like a noose, it could look like a rod. Do you get what I'm saying in terms of flexibility? So the Torah's Chaim asked that it's evident from the Gemara that a change which invalidates a lulav for a mitzvah in Sukkot affects acquisition. So in other words, anytime you take something that can be used as a mitzvah and change its purposefulness, it now affects acquisition for the person that's done that. So why does the Gemara not say that the acquisition is affected in this case? Because tearing off the leaves invalidates the lulav for the mitzvah. So the Torah's Chaim answers that the Gemara here is dealing with one who stole an invalid lulav, in which case the tearing off the leaf doesn't change the status of the lulav from valid to invalid. So the Gemara must give a different reason for the robber's acquisition. Okay? So in this case, each leaf that grows as a folded double leaf, and when making it folded becomes almost the rigidity of a broom, and the double leaves are split along their folds and tied together to form this like sort of broom. And the leaves have undergone an irreversible change, because once you've done that, they've almost taken shape and form. But it's not quite the case, because we learned that, once you turn that into some sort of a rope, meaning you take something that's flexible, almost looking inflexible, but moving it around, you can make it inflexible again. So anything that isn't permanent, it does not affect acquisition. So how does that deal with what we dealt with yesterday? There's a rabbinic enactment of a non-permanent physical change which is reversible, that affects acquisition, to allow those that have put in a lot of effort to make it to Shuvah, because they're not going to want to undo all their good effort. They just want to pay the monetary equivalent when they feel bad about what they've done. According to a biblical change, it has to be a physical, irreversible change. So Rav Papa inquires, if one steals a lulav and its twin leaf becomes split in two, what's the law? Does this constitute a change in effect acquisition? The Gemara resolves the inquiry from the following. Rav Masun said in the name of Rav Yehoshua ben Levi, if the twin leaf was removed, the lulav is invalid for the mitzvah of taking a lulav on Sukkot, and it's not presumable that the same law, that the lulav becomes invalid, applies if the twin leaf is split. So what do we mean is that since the splitting of a twin leaf invalidates the lulav, it's obviously considered to have undergone a physical change that affects acquisition, because we learn from the Torah's Chaim that when you take something that's able to do a mitzvah and now is not, it actually becomes the acquisition of the person that's made the change. But when we're talking about applying the twin leaf principle of a split, he's saying that maybe in that case you can still do the mitzvah and it doesn't invalidate it. So the Gemara's solution is rejected, but before it's rejected, the proposal that's given is that maybe in that case, the Gemara assumes that the removal of the twin leaf invalidates the lulav for a different reason, not because it no longer becomes a kosher lulav, but that lulav lacks beauty, so it can't be mahuda. So it follows that the same holds true if the twin leaf was split. That was proposed in Gemara Sukkos 29b. Okay? But the resolution at the end of the day is rejected. It says, no, the splitting of the twin leaf does not invalidate the lulav for the mitzvah. For removal of the twin leaf is different. For there, the lulav is not whole. Meaning that the lulav isn't disqualified because of a lack of beauty, but because part of the missing tree invalidates the lulav itself. But when only the twin leaf is split, no part is missing and the lulav is still valid. So we're saying that it has nothing to do with the beauty factor. It has to do with the utility factor. Okay? So the Gemara cites an alternative version of the resolution based on an alternative version by Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi's statement. Some say the following. Come learn a resolution from the following. Rav Masun said in the name of Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi, if the twin leaf was split, it's considered as if the twin leaf was removed and the lulav is invalid. Learn from this that if one steals a lulav and its twin leaf is then split in two, the lulav is considered having undergone a physical change and the robber acquires it because you can no longer do the mitzvah. Okay. So, we're going to just discuss what various changes are. And I'm pleased I chose this particular one to give it to Arthur because it's not, these are all very, very straightforward things. So if you're feeling under the weather, this is probably the right day to feel under the weather because literally it's actually under the weather today, by the way. Anyway, the Gemara constitutes its discussion of the various changes. Rav Papa said, in the case of this person who stole earth from his fellow and made it into a brick, he does not inquire it. What's the reason? Okay, so what we're saying is basically he wanted to build bricks from his house, so his next door neighbor had special earth that could bake in the sun and could create the right constitution of clay for a brick. So if that's the case, then if he stole the material, he would have to give the cash equivalent to his neighbor. Remember, no thief here gets away with just acquisition. It's acquisition of the article and payment of that article's worth, by the way. So he's saying, well, does he acquire the brick? And we say he doesn't acquire it because, again, it's not permanent. Any brick that's there, you can smash it and put water on it and reverse it and make it earth again. So if you can reverse the change, it doesn't have a biblical acquisition of a permanent change. But if you stole a brick and made it into the earth, he does acquire it. So say, for example, you took a whole lot of bricks and you wanted to make them into cement to create a pillar or a foundational floor, and a brick would be too structured and rigid. The thief actually acquires it and has to pay the cash equivalent to his neighbor. So we want to know why, because you might say an objection, well, that doesn't make sense, because once he grounds it up into earth, he can always rebuild a brick from it. So surely then that's a reversible change. And the Gemara says, no, that's not really so. Because whatever brick he decides to make from the brick that he ground down and then decided to make a brick again is not the same brick. No two bricks are the same. It's like a fingerprint. You're never going to get it in exactly the same constitutional formula in terms of water, cement, sand ratio. You're never going to get it into the same size, the same consistency. What you're doing is creating a new brick. And when there's a new face brick that comes in, it's considered an irreversible change. So either way, when you take it from a brick to earth, even if you make a new brick, it's considered an irreversible change from the original brick, and the acquisition occurs for the thief. He pays a financial equivalent to the owner of the earth. But if you took earth and made it a brick, it still constitutes the same earth, and therefore he has to return that brick to the original owner instead of giving him financial compensation. So Rav Papa issued some other rulings. In the case of a person who stole an ingot of silver from his fellow and made it into coins, he does not acquire it. So I'm assuming that an ingot of silver, you see, from what I understood from currency, is that today currency is recognizable by the fact that you can't create a counterfeit example, and therefore it holds value by the fact that it's not copyable, or you can't mimic it, and therefore it holds its value. Otherwise, anybody would print it. But there, the material itself contained the value itself in a large degree of currencies, because you had gold and you had silver. And originally, if you look at the South African rand when it was worth something, or the American land, you could get that equivalent of gold, by the way. It could never happen today. Money is just printed. That's why it's inflation, where it's not worth anything. And the solution, which is short term, is just print more money. But it doesn't actually solve the problem. That's why Germany landed up into such trouble and entered into World War II, because after the execution of King Ferdinand and after their World War I debacle, with the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance, it left Germany broke. So the Germans, as bright as they thought they were, decided just to manufacture money, and they were carrying buckets to buy a loaf of bread because nobody held it as anything other than ridiculous. Okay, so in the case of a person who stole an ingot of silver from his fellow and makes it into coins, he does not acquire it. What's the reason? Because again, he can make them into an ingot of silver. And in other words, the change of the coin is reversible, and it doesn't affect the acquisition. Because although you say, well, maybe it's like the brick, is that it doesn't resemble the original coin. It'll differ in size and shape from the original one. We don't say it's like a new face brick that came into being. Why? Because it's different to a case of a brick. A brick has to be made into a specific size in order to have utility. But no one cares about the size, the shape, or form of a single silver ingot. Why? Because as long as the weight is correct, it holds its value. So you have to look at utility. It's the utility of it that determines if it's a new brick or not. So if the first brick was useful and it had a certain exact dimension, and now you can never get it back to that dimension, it's considered permanently changed. With an ingot of silver, it doesn't matter if the shape is changed, as long as the weight is the same, the value is the same, and therefore it's a reversible change because you're getting back the value of what you had before. So that doesn't affect acquisition for the thief. He doesn't get to keep this ingot of silver and replace it with the financial value to the original owner. Okay, so you see the difference between that and the brick. It's pretty clever. Now, so it says, okay. So Rav Papa said further, for in the case of this person who stole an ingot of silver from his fellow and made it into coins, he does not acquire it. What's the reason? He can make them into an ingot of silver again. If, however, he stole coins and made them into an ingot of silver, he does acquire it. And you're saying, but hang on a second, it doesn't make sense. Because here we took silver, we made it into coins, we made it back into silver. So you got the value. But if you steal coins and you made them into silver, why does that acquire it? Because it has to have physically changed from the original position. You could say an objection, for example, as it says in the Gemara, he again made them back into coins, so that the original changing of the coins into an ingot of silver is a reversible change. So the Gemara says it's not so. Because even if we were to make the ingot of silver back into coins, that would be considered different coins. And a new face will have come into being here. So melting the coins into an ingot of silver is an irreversible change, because you can make new coins out of the ingot of silver, but the original coins cannot be restored. So what he's saying is that there's one thing if you derive the value of the currency by the weight and the material used. It's another thing when the currency itself holds value by who appears on the currency. So, for example, if you had a coin with a Greek or Roman emperor on it at a certain era, and you get rid of that and you melt it down, it's worth babkas now. Do you get what I'm saying? It's different if you're taking a certain value of items and then you exchange it for cash, and then you change your mind, you take the cash and you exchange it for the value of items. Very, very similarly in terms of concept, because you can still get the previous value, although you'd have to get the exact same item. Here we're saying that the minute you melt down the coins for the silver, you can't reconstitute the exact same coins with a sort of imprint to be legitimate currency. So therefore that effect does, that physical change does affect acquisition for the robber, and he has to give the original owner the cash equivalent. So, accordingly, melting coins into an ingot of silver is an irreversible change, because you can't make the new coins out of the ingot of silver, but the original ones, well, you can make new coins, but you can't get the original ones restored with the right sort of imprint and branding. So Rav Papa continues, if one stole old tarnished coins and made them like new, in other words, he polished and shined them and used silver and brass or whatever, he doesn't acquire them. Okay, and the reason why he doesn't acquire them, because eventually they'll become tarnished again. In other words, once they've aged and there's oxidation, you can make them shiny only for a very short period of time. But you could say an objection that you can make them shiny and new again, and then tarnishing them is not considered an irreversible change, meaning you just have to regularly maintain them. So the Gemara is saying it's not so, because their tarnish will always be discernible. Why? Because even if they can make to look a little bit shiny or new, there's what you call wear and tear, where if it's in the pocket rubbing against other coins, the crispness of the emboldment or the engraving or whatever, embossed, where the image is pushed out, kind of wears out a little bit. Do you get what I'm saying? Where it's not as crisp. So even though it might look new, you can see if you examine it, it's not. So therefore, that's an irreversible change when they age. Now we've got 9 minutes, and then that'll be enough. Then we on to the next Mishnah. The Gemara starts the final clause. This is the rule: all robbers pay the value as at the time of the robbery. Again, it's the most important rule. All robbers pay the value as at the time of the robbery. It doesn't matter when the court date is. So, what does this rule come to include? It comes to include that which Rav Ila said: if one stole a lamb and it matured into a ram, and if he stole a calf and it matured into a calf, It has undergone a physical change in the possession, and he has thereby acquired it. And thereby, if he slaughters it or sells it, he's not liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment, for it is his animal that he's slaughtering, it is his animal that he's selling. So what he's saying is that if the animal takes on sexual maturation, okay, then what actually happens is that, well, look, guys, a lamb actually matures at the age of 13 months and 1 day, according to the Gemara in Parah chapter 1, verse 3. So at that age, it undergoes a physical change of adolescence, puberty, if you will. And as far as a calf maturing into an ox, it's 2 years and 1 day. So the minute that happens, you're not stealing the same animal that you took originally. So the 4 or 5-fold payment is only triggered not when you steal an ox or a lamb, but when you either slaughter it or then resell it. That's the key point. And if it's undergone a physical change of sexual maturation, you're not liable to the 4-fold or 5-fold penalties. 4-fold for a sheep or 5-fold for a calf. But in that particular case, you're only liable for the double payment, as you would in any other item if you stole a cell phone or an ashtray. So quickly, we've got 7 minutes. There was a certain person who stole a pair of oxen from his fellow. He went and plowed with them and seeded with them. In the end, he returned the oxen to the owner. He came before Rav Nachman for judgment. Rav Nachman said to him, "Go and praise the improvement that improved with the oxen, because the oxen was used to plow the land and embed the seeds. And the robber must pay the owner of the oxen the value of the improvement to the robber that the land generated by the oxen's work." So Rabba said to Rav Nachman, "But did the oxen cause the improvement and the land did not cause the improvement? Certainly the value of the improvement does not represent the labor of the oxen alone." So what Rabba was saying to Rav Nachman is, you cannot expect the person that stole the ox and used the labor to pay what that improvement caused to the land, because it's almost like he bought him a new ox. So he's saying you have to take into effect that there was a bit of labor, yes, but at the end of the day, the ground yielded the improvement, not the animal alone. So you've got to be a little bit gentle. So Rav Nachman said, am I saying that the whole improvement should be appraised and paid by the robber? I'm indeed saying that half the improvement should be appraised and paid by the robber, meaning he's acknowledging that the land played a role. So Rabba said to Rav Nachman, in the final analysis, in the case of the robbery, this is only a case of robbery. In other words, the stolen article needs to be returned as is. There's no penalties above returning the original article, because it hasn't been sold in any way and it hasn't been slaughtered. So we're saying, well, why don't you pay double? Because it's a robbery, guys. It's not a theft. But we learned in the Mishnah, all robbers pay at the time of the robbery. So Rav Nachman said to Rabba, have I not said to you, when I sit in judgment, do not say anything to me? For Rav Huna, our friend, said about me that I and King Shabur are brothers in matters of monetary law, meaning according to King Shabur was known as Shmuel, is that in areas of monetary law, the ruling is undisputed. So Rabba has no right to question Rav Nachman. And the reason I made this robber pay for his benefit he derived from the stolen ox, even though we only generally make the robber pay what he stole and not double 4 or 5-fold, is because this is a habitual robber. He's an old man now, and he's been robbing his whole life. So I needed to penalize him in order that he learns his lesson and also does it to teshuva. So we learn from this that a recognized authority like Rav Nachman has the power to impose extrajudicial penalties, even outside Eretz Israel, where normative Torah penalties generally can't be imposed, as you know. You can't have a knas outside Eretz Israel penalty. You can only have compensation. But in this case, somebody of Rav Nachman's stature can even apply extra penalties, not only within Eretz Israel, but out of Eretz Israel. And he did this in the special case as a lesson. Because generally, what a person robs, they only pay back what they stole, and they return the original item when they can. All right, guys, so we have finished. Congratulations, we're 96b2. We're going to hit the next Mishnah.
Damon, question for you. But the thing with, if the guy admits to the theft of the robbery, that affects also his penalty.
Yes, for the thief, absolutely. So where we say that he runs to the court before the witnesses that come against him, he can say, listen, I did wrong, here's the item, he just has to return it. The penalty is because he troubled the court and he made witnesses and he wasn't prepared to do a teshuvah until he was caught out. If the witnesses come and he admits to it, it's too late. He's got to make a race to return the original article. That's absolutely correct.
That thing when you just, sorry, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's applies.
Where he makes get witnesses and waste of time. A modern day term is called defeating the ends of justice.
Defeating the ends of justice. That's exactly the point, and that's why he's paying a penalty. That's 100% correct, Kevin.
So if he would have admitted, he just said, no, then he has to pay a penalty, double and even up to 5 times for being foolish. He would have just had to return the animal intact.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Kevin, that's exactly the perfect point. I didn't even think of that, but that's true. Arthur, I hope you're feeling better, mate.
Do I look like I belong to a certain clan, Damon?
Yeah, but I can't say which one.
A Scottish one.
It's something like it.
It comes with the tartan, eh? That's what you mean.
Yeah, I don't want us to be kicked off YouTube.
Yeah, well, as long as you don't flash us in your kilt, we're all okay.
Yes, okay. No, that I wouldn't do. That I'm not.
No, that could actually increase our viewership.
It could increase our viewership once. It's like
once. And then we'll get delisted or dethroned.
You know what? The Scottish are tough. If I saw a whole lot of men with their face paintings and sharp axes and farming implements running without undies on over thistles, and their national plant is that one with the thistle and everything else, and I would run a mile. I think that'd scare me. If you've ever smelled haggis cooking, which is the innards of the animal, my knees nearly good. If you can stomach that, sure, it's tough. Flip it. Things. All right, Arthur, I hope you have a good day, my friend.
Arthur, have a good luck for your meeting, Arthur.
Yeah.
All right, let's not wake him.
No, Gavin, that's classic. Cheers, but.